Amidst Moscow's annexation plans in Ukraine, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has made a call for mobilizing personnel who serve the army. He further accused NATO of using nuclear blackmail against Moscow. Putin earlier met with representatives of Russia's military technology and manufacturing firms. During this meeting, Putin asked for faster delivery of arms and equipment. The Russian president also hailed country's weapons, which he said were effective against the West.
Организациям ОПК необходимо в самые кратчайшие сроки обеспечить поставку требуемого вооружения и техники в войска, средства поражения. Поэтому необходимо в кратчайший период нарастить производственные возможности, максимально загрузить оборудование, оптимизировать технологические циклы и, не снижая качество, сократить при этом сроки производства.
Now, Putin's call for delivery of weapons comes at a time when Russian parliament has approved of stricter wartime punishments for the soldiers. The Russian lawmakers have passed a legislation that toughens the punishment under wartime acts, including desertion and surrender. Under the new law, there will be a 10-year prison sentence for desertion, failure to report for military service and surrender. Looting will be punishable by 15 years in prison, while destruction of weapons carries a maximum term of 5 years. According to this bill, mobilization, martial law, wartime and armed conflict will be considered as aggravating circumstances and will entail more severe punishments. The legislation is yet to be passed by the Federation Council, that is the upper chamber of the Russian parliament. It can be signed into law by President Vladimir Putin only after that. Now, for more on this, we're being joined by Ihor Bralyan, who is a journalist from Kiev. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. First things first, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered the mobilization of more personnel. How do you see this affecting the situation in Ukraine?
Good morning. First of all, I want to say that this mobilization would be a failure for Vladimir Putin because it's impossible to get a new soldiers because a lot of people have been killed in Ukraine and this mobilization for Putin is the last chance to get some new soldiers to conquer Ukraine, and that's why this plan is not so good. And Ukrainian soldiers who liberated Kharkiv region, they have found the letters of Russian soldiers in which they wrote to refuse to fight more, and so these letters were from June, and now we have September, so a lot of Russian soldiers have finally understood what is going on. It's not some training, it's not so-called special military operation, it's just war, very horrific war.
All right.
In which they could be killed.
All right. Now, with that being said, you say this is the last chance for Russia, but Russia has in fact introduced stricter punishments as well. There were, of course, fears of heightened retaliation by Moscow after Ukraine's successful and lightning counteroffensive. So what do you think is going to happen? How do you see this panning out going forward? There are also referendums which have been called for in eastern regions of Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk especially.
First of all, please don't call it referendum because it's something else, but not referendum. It could be, it could name as performance, circus. It's a legitimate act of Russian occupation forces in which some local collaborators are involved. And the whole world have to condemn these actions of brutal violations of international law. There would be no referendum, and these performances would be possible only when the people with machine guns could sit near people who vote for it. And so that's all. And Russia has already used this scenario in Crimea 8 years ago when they forced people to vote for so-called joining Russia, but in fact it was the annexation of Crimea. The same was in Donetsk and Lugansk, and they are using the same playbook in the south of Ukraine, in Zaporizhia, in Kherson region. I mean, it's illegitimate act. It can't be, understood from some other different position. And the main task for the United Nations, for all other international organizations, to condemn it, and finally to say Putin that he is a brutal dictator who has started this war. And I want to tell you that only dictators have used the referendum to approve their own decision. We have seen it, for example, in Nazi Germany, when it was a referendum that Germany have left the League of Nations in 1934. And the same we see in contemporary Russia, because Nazi regime, they are just the same. And Putin is a new Hitler.
All right. Well, you're absolutely right. We saw a similar move in 2014 in the case of Crimea as well. You also mentioned the United Nations. But when we speak about the global community, what more do you think that the global community can do?
I think, first of all, what global community can do is to follow Ukrainian narrative, to hear Ukraine, to hear what Ukrainian officials are talking, to hear what Ukrainians are talking abroad, and to discover Ukraine, its history, its culture, and to understand Ukraine from the Ukrainian perspective. Because for a long period of time, due to Russian propaganda, a lot of people all over the world, they were manipulated. And Russia told them that in Ukraine there are some neo-Nazi people, and so on and so on. And the best way to debunk the Russian propaganda is to study more Ukrainian history and politics and Ukrainian society.
All right. Well, Mr. Igor Brailean, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.